first started on Star Wars, it had the novelty of never having been done before, and everything back then had to be made up, improvised, or developed before you could even start doing visual effects. What was it like to work in an environment like that?
Well, it was, you can imagine, fun and creative, very and challenging. I've always thought that, working at ILM always has it's that slight element of possible failure that stirs you on and spurs you on to success, and it has always had that aspect to it. And I used to think that was pretty unusual, but it's probably something of every field. You have that nagging thought that, my gosh, what if I failed?
I guess the template that you had to use would have come from 2001: A Space Odyssey, really, when you were developing the sort of miniature and the effects for Star Wars. And so, what was your model? I mean, what was the template besides 2001? Is that all you had?
Well, what we did was we would see 2001 several times, and we knew that we were talking about what George Lucas wanted was what was called boilerplate technology. He didn't want that invisible technology that everything has an absolute smooth skin, kind of the Buck Rogers kind of a thing. So we did use 2001 as our model, but when we would look at it, we would see that it actually didn't have interconnectedness. And it's like when you, say a flap on an airplane has fallen down, you can see all these tubes and pipes, and this leads to this, and that structure leads to that structure, this one leads to that, and it has a real logical about it, and a strut is a certain diameter. If you make that like an eighth of that diameter, the logic tells you it's not going to work. So one of the things when we would look at that ship going overhead in 2001, they had been arbitrarily put together. Yes, it worked very good in the shot, and people didn't question it, but we looked at it and we thought, it doesn't have the engineered look that we kind of want, and we want to have rivets on everything, and we want to have the tube that leads to the next thing. But so that's the kind of thing that we did.
You were under a tremendous amount of pressure to come up with visual effects for an unforgiving studio that was worried about where the money was being spent.
Yeah.
It's something you really haven't had to deal with since then when making a Star Wars film.
No, that's not really true. Budget is always a factor. You have to, each individual department has to make a bid on what they think a certain thing will cost. In this meeting that we had with John Knoll just recently, he points up that, say if a set is only going to be used for 3 shots, they don't necessarily want to build a multi-$100,000 set, whereas if it's going to be used for 10 or 15 shots, they can amortize it over that. Well, the same thing is true of models. Every once in a while they will, models, really elaborate models like the big Star Destroyer that goes overhead or the Millennium Falcon, they cost like what exotic cars cost, or at least expensive sedans, racy sedans. And some of them cost as much as Ferraris. So there's certain shots, like let's say an example, the pod that gets dropped out of the Princess's ship with C-3PO and R2-D2 in it. That was only going to be used once, never ever seen again. And I made that in 5 days. It was just what I call a 5-day wonder. If you look very closely, it's 2 one-gallon paint buckets. The angle that it goes up is a paint bucket. We cut off the edge, cut off the bottom, filled it with foam, put another bucket this way that we truncated. And but it was only worth 5 days' work, not 5 weeks' work, for that one shot. We saw more of him, at the time when I originally started, there were 30 employees, and now there's more like 1,200 employees, 1,000 to 1,200. So he has to hit the tops of the waves, the ones that he knows he needs to hit, and doesn't have as much time for interaction like he used to. I don't have, I used to see dailies every single day, almost every day, and now I just specifically go in for the shots that I'm working on, because if I went in for everybody's shot, you could literally stay there all day and watch the film that was shot the previous day.
What's it like to be a part of this franchise? When you come to an event like this, the Star Wars Celebration, does it overwhelm you, the sort of following this movie has? I mean, when you're 1975,
Yeah.
when you're starting out working on this company and you're putting model kits together to come up with with a Star Destroyer, did you think it would ever reach this frenzy?
Nah, even, when we first started, the previous year, Silent Running was the big science fiction film, and almost no one ever, I don't imagine anybody ever rents it or goes back and refers to it. You know, it was a kind of, you know, a yawner. And so when I first started in Star Wars, we thought, well, you know, what is this? It's a science fiction film. But it didn't take to work on it very long to realize the vision was pretty grand, you know, pretty big. And but even our wildest estimation didn't match what really happened. You know, we started to think that, this thing's going to be really big. And then even after that, when it, you know, there weren't any real plans. I went on and we were going to start another job, you know. We did Galactica, worked on Galactica afterwards, and we thought, well, maybe, you know, Star Wars was a bye-bye. We go on to other things, and then all of a sudden it was Empire Strikes Back, and I moved up north with several people. But, I mean, you just didn't imagine 30 years, you know, how to try to, with yourself or anybody, try to imagine the germ of something you're doing now is going to be millions of times fold in 30 years. You know. And when you come to an event like this, it is overwhelming. I myself, it's almost like I have to remove myself a little bit from it once in a while. It's charming, it's amazing, it's inspirational. You know, what people have done with this one kind of thing, but sometimes it's a little bit like a wave. You know, you can see the wave coming, and it is overpowering.
The third film, the final installment in the entire saga.
Yeah, Revenge of the Sith.
Are we in for a treat?
Well, yeah, it is. We saw some footage, I'm not sure if you did the other night, and I've seen bits and pieces of it. It's pretty spectacular. And, you know, everybody's mentioned this part about it being quite darker. You know, it's a dark film, and I mean, it kind of brings about why Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader. It becomes the personification of evil. I like the look of it even more than the two previous ones, you know. The first three Star Wars they're almost like simple shapes, you know. It was one of the things that probably about the original Star Wars, it was very appealing. It was just blocks, you know, it would be one robot here and a panel here and a distant sky with clouds or distant stars and things. And it got more and more complex. And this is certainly a visually complex film, but it does have there's a darker drama to it too. Just visually too, not just story-wise, but the look of it.
Are you constantly asked to change what you know? Are you an early adopter of technology? I mean, building model miniatures now seems to be replaced by computer-animated technology. Is model making an obsolete art in filmmaking these days?
No, it isn't. You know, it's kind of a misconception to think that. Granted, George can do anything he wants to. He could say, well, let's do the next one with popsicle sticks if he wanted to, you know. No more digital, only popsicle sticks. But, you know, when I first started, there was 30 employees, 7 of which were model makers. Well, now there's 1,100 or so employees and between 50 and 70 model makers. So we still contribute a lot to the film. It's just that CG is the giant gorilla in the room, you know. There can be 800 artists of CG, you know, so they're a pretty powerful group. And as far as, you know, coming up with new things, you definitely, you know, you get used to being asked to come up with solutions to problems. And they aren't just, say, building a model out of plastic, you know, which is still can be very challenging. But I thought of somebody asked me, and I thought of an example the other day that, you know, people start to come to you for answers. Like there's a guy that knows chemistry, like he knows chemistry like, you know the back of your hand or that kind of thing. Sure. And you can ask him any question and he just sees it mathematically, works it out, comes up with a solution. And I was a physics kind of guy, not a chemistry kind of guy. But somebody needed a solution that in a film called Fire in the Sky, they stretch a membrane, a vinyl latex membrane over a person and pull a vacuum. So the actor only has a very short period of time to scream. There's sheets put over him, and then the vacuum is pulled. So he can't get any more air. You know, there's no more air to have. He's already expelled his air, screaming, and then this vinyl sheet. So the first thing that has to happen is one of the aliens who's operating on him has to take a little tool and cut the membrane across his screaming mouth. Well, the problem with that was that an X-Acto blade, or a very sharp little knife, if you look at it microscopically, it's actually quite rough. It's almost like serrated and rough, and it won't cut. You know, it'll pull like a hook would, but it won't cut. So they had to keep turning it off and pulling it off, and the guy'd be out of breath and everything. So they came and asked me what to do, and I knew that what microscopically a blade looks like, and I knew that glass ends almost at, a shard of glass ends almost at one molecule, not a whole bunch of ragged pieces of metal. So what I did was I broke some glass, and I found one piece that was like little semicircle, scimitar shaped, that was about 1/8 of an inch, a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, and I mounted it onto a tool, and then I instructed the alien to, I had her practice. I took a paper cup and I stretched the membrane, because she had a costume on, and I said, you know, you've got to hit within the center of that circle. If you hit there, you'll hit his lip, and the little piece of glass will cut his lip. So she practiced over and over and over again to hit the center, and then so when we did the shot, she's ready, and she's going to operate, and his mouth is open and screaming, and she hits it, and as soon as the obsidian or the glass hits the membrane, it makes a long, 3-inch long cut. You know, it just immediately goes like you would have popped a balloon or something. So that isn't really traditional model making, but it's the type of, we're asked to come up with solutions to things beyond what you would think of just as model making.
What is your favorite Star Wars film to work on?
Well, the favorite to work on, you know, it's like whatever newly you're working on is pretty interesting. The hardest probably was Empire Strikes Back, in that so few of us went up north. There was only about originally 6 people that moved up north, and we had an empty warehouse. And well, that's a loud booming sound, isn't it?
That sure is. Is that the film clips?
I don't know what it is.
It's probably the reverberation from the film. We're okay though.
Yeah, it'll add some drama to the thing. You know, you get to do challenging things almost every film you do. You know, granted, there's some that come along that they just ask you to do one small little part of it. You know, an example, not that it wasn't an interesting project to do, but in the film Out of Africa, they didn't have a train at the beginning of the shot. There's this open veldt area with grass in Africa, and they needed an antique train, like a 1930s train, traveling in the background. So we made a model of what a train, we researched it and looked up about how that train should look, and made it about 15 feet long, and then added that to the back of that scene. But I mean, I use that as an example of just things that you wouldn't expect to have a model or a special effect in it, but they do.